We want to highlight, the best attributes of the tree. It could be, our root spread, the nabari, or this kind of a movement or nuance in the trunk that's, an interesting perspective to interpret the tree at. But generally, it makes sense. There's a convention to the tree. If we establish a movement, say, for this tree example, to my left or your right, then we would want to elongate branches on that right side while compacting the left. So we kind of have this net flow and movement in the tree that accentuates and pulls together this design. So when I look at this piece of material, the first thing that kind of stands out to me is we have this nice piece of deadwood on the bottom. I don't know if you can catch it here, but we can see this shari down here. And it's a nice feature in junipers, right? We want to accentuate the contrast between the live and dead parts of the tree. Especially for junipers, we get this sense of age, and there's kind of a beauty in framing both the living and dead portions of the tree. So in picking the front, right, that's a consideration. What angle of the tree is going to best show off that contrast? If we look at the back side of the tree here, even though there's a bark kind of coming up the trunk, you can kind of see out here, this part of the tree has actually all died back already. So this back of the tree is just the deadwood. So maybe you might consider, we have some feature here, some interest in the deadwood. We don't have that contrast from the dead vein and the live vein. So for me, that's like an immediate sign that, okay, maybe the other side of the tree is more suitable for the front. So I will be using kind of this orientation of the tree. So going from there, right, now that we've picked, a rough front, our second consideration is in the angle of the tree, right? Say maybe we have a particular side of the tree that's too prominent, coming too far forward. Well, then we can tilt it back. In this case, this tree is growing a little bit more, away towards you. You have this large inside curve and bowing trunk. So in this case, we might want to bring it slightly forward, and that would be a better consideration for its design. So we have some blocks, and I'll tweak the angle from there. Now, aside from now we established a rough idea, for our front and our angle. The second consideration is, well, what do I do with all these branches? We have this notable branch right here in the bottom where, quite a substantial amount of the foliage on the tree is present. What I don't like about this branch is that we have this long straight section, right? And it's very close to the shari line. This is a part of a tree we want to show off. So we have visually such a strong, heavy mass of foliage out in this portion of the tree, really close relative to this deadwood. It's almost pulling away the visual interest, and we don't really appreciate this portion of the tree quite as much. So we kind of have a few approaches we can go about this. We can say, well, maybe this is too thick and it's not very interesting for this design of the tree. So we opt to cut it off and make it into a shari and a feature, and instead we drive all this foliage nice and close to the trunk. These longer branches I will likely bring down, so we push it in close to the left side, right? We elongate the right side, we maintain this convention of movement and directionality in the tree. So my thoughts is potentially, we can use this, but to make this straight section of the trunk usable, the movement needs to flow and have convention with the rest of the trunk. So what I'm going to do, we'll take this straight section here and we'll put on some raffia, which is a fiber to kind of support and brace the trunk, and we'll put a thicker gauge aluminum wire first to bring this up. And we don't want it to be up and straight because it'll just contrast strongly with this kind of very elegant trunk line. So we want to bring it up and kind of bow it out slightly so we have a slight curve. And again, continuing with that theme of we're driving the movement to the right, keeping the left side compact so it's cohesive. So that's kind of my thought process for, when I look at the tree, what I'm going to do with it. And so we'll kind of just get started and get straight into it. So again, what I was mentioning with changing the angle, this part of the tree, it's kind of sitting too far back away from you. So with that in mind, I want to bring it, a little bit forward. Maybe not so much so, but as long as we can kind of have a slight inclination where the tree is coming towards us. And before I kind of start winding the tree, I'm going to go through and clean everything. All this dead bark here where we have right here we have this nice thick live vein. This underside here is actually all dead, which you can see connects to this gin here. So I have some tools. We're going to clean off all the bark, and then we're going to go through, clean up all the foliage. Mainly any branches that I see I don't need, I'll cut off. We want a clean pad, right? We have a strong terminal shoot like this. We can take off all the growth on the bottom, as well as thin out any kind of overcrowding of crotch growth. And it'll make the foliage kind of more easy and workable to make pads and clean wiring. And so that's kind of the first step to prep the tree. You don't want to just go straight into wiring it. So I have this kind of like a gouge of sorts, and we can just kind of peel off all this dead bark. You can see it's already all died back. If I had some sandpaper or brushes, you could take it a step further. Normally you see for junipers, right, you can clean out the live veins more, and you can put a lime sulfur on the deadwood, and you get that nice contrast with, you know, this bright, you know, almost sun bleached looked wood, and then this nice deep rich red color in the live vein. If we wanted to pop more, that's something we can do. Generally, if you know you're going to show the tree and you want to present it better, that's normally another step I would do. Another consideration though is that, you know, it's not always necessary, I would say, to, you know, put lime sulfur and have that extra pop. I would say it's more relevant for smaller trees. The reason being, for a smaller tree, right, you have kind of less branches and kind of contrast to work with. So for a shohin tree, you really want that pop between the live wood and the deadwood in the live vein. So in that case, I would recommend that, yeah, you sandpaper, clean the live vein, and you put lime sulfur and have that nice contrast. But for a bigger tree, right, just inherent to the size, there's already going to be more contrast between the living and dead portions. So I would say it's not as crucial that, depending on the scale of the tree, maybe you don't need that stark contrast between the, you know, the deep red and white color. So all this stuff here is already dyed back. It's just the old bark, so we're just peeling it off so we can kind of appreciate that contrast. What we'll do actually is we'll carry up this shari line, and we'll bring it all the way up on the trunk. It'll give us a little more kind of contrast, and you know, we want to see not just the bark. We want to see the separation of live wood and dead vein. We can see here where this stump is dyed back on the top. We can actually carry this down. You can see it's actually already dyed back. We can have this little V shape carried down in the trunk. So we'll have a separation of live vein here on the top, and a little bit coming in the back where I think it's actually dyed off. Yeah, we can see this bark is dry. All this in the back has already been done. Yeah, and generally when you make shari, in this case I'm not actually adding new shari. This is already existing under the bark where this separation of the live and dead parts is. You can see here where I pulled back the bark, where you see it's a little bit more pale and white. This is where the transition to where the live vein is. Say if this was alive and I had to make fresh shari, Generally, right, you want to go with the grain. If you kind of traverse it and cut across, there's a potential you kill some of the foliage above it. But normally, to a degree, you can influence how it's going to grow. Say maybe cut it diagonally if you want to shift the orientation to how we want the live vein to grow. Just never perpendicular across. In this case, this is pretty straightforward. This is actually just the natural hidden shari on the tree, and we're just removing the bark and trying to find where that live edge is, where you can see this white part popping out. So again, with this top part as well, I think we'll kind of cut out a little outline, and we can extend this V shape all the way down, maybe to here. So instead of just having this long straight section in the trunk, we introduce a little bit more contrast, have a little bit more interest in this design.
Julian, to interrupt for just a
Yeah.
minute. When Julian is finished with his presentation, we will auction this tree. Just so you know.
So dig deep.
Dig deep. Grab those wallets.
We take credit cards, no problem.
So yeah, it looks like I wasn't too sure if this was live or not. That's why I was kind of doing the pre-cut. But we can see, like with the backside, this is all dyed back already. So we're just kind of exposing the shari that already exists. And you can see here now it's beginning to, we see this white bark pop up. So this is kind of where the transition of the natural dye back occurred. We see this slight thickening here, which is supporting this branch here, and we'll probably use this for our apex. You have that natural separation where you see, a branch here, the corresponding grains a little bit thicker, and here with the apex. I do actually want to carry it out a little bit longer, so we'll actually extend this shari a bit to actually where it's alive. This is okay. Mm-hmm.
Julian, can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to be working at that nursery in Japan?
Yeah, of course. Apprenticeship is really like it's a huge commitment, and officially, right? The apprenticeship is considered 5 years for a full apprenticeship. So I was only there just under 2. But kind of like the working schedule, the expectations to it, it is pretty much a 7-day-a-week work. You have no days off except at the discretion of your or I call him my oyakata, or my boss there. So it is quite a rigorous working schedule. I would say in terms of like the workload, it really just depends on the season. Out in Japan you get typhoons, right? It's just the same thing as the hurricanes, but it spins in the other direction. So it's a huge deal when typhoons come in, and you don't want any of the trees or client trees to get damaged by the storm. So it's a big kind of hustle. You move every single tree inexpensive trees go inside. We tie everything down. So it's a huge amount of work. So I would say, typhoon season's busy, as well as repotting season. Of course, preparing for the shows like Kokofu. And the other show that we also vend at is Taikon 10, and that's out in Kyoto. And it's a smaller show, but also hosted by the Professional Bonsai Association there. But I like it in that it's maybe not as rigid as the Kokofu, and you see, more varieties in terms of species. It's a little more interesting, and I guess enjoyable, less stressful to work at. Yeah, I would say, in terms of the routine, right? Typically, we would get in at the nursery at 8 a.m. sharp. We water the trees at 10 a.m. So essentially from that time between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., whoever is that lowest apprentice at the time will come in, you'll clean all the ashtrays and yeah, and like, my wife, he loved to smoke. It was so yeah, you go in, you clean all the ashtrays, sweep the nursery. If you had work kind of from the previous day, you would kind of already have an idea of what he set out for you to do. If it's a tree you're wiring or working on and preparing it for a sale. So it would vary a lot. At Kokaen, right, for that kind of nursery and business model, it was a lot of refinement work. So we would go to auctions or other enthusiasts or sometimes professionals, and we would look for trees that were, at a stage that we could do the work to them and improve them, to increase its monetary value, but something that was in a smaller time scale, right? For Kokaen or my nursery, we didn't want to get a tree that would say invest like a significant, years of times to work on, because we are trying to look for a faster turnaround time as far as a business goes. So a lot of time, if anybody kind of followed my work there or kind of just saw the work I was posting, it's nice to see like these transformations, I guess. But a lot of times when you think about, these really clean and dramatic transformations, it's on material that's being developed as bonsai for, generations. So the branch and refinement, the quality is very high. So you're able to take that step of refinement on it. But sometimes, the trees are not quite ready. And if you try to, I guess, push that look, that silhouette, when the tree is too premature, you end up kind of taking shortcuts, right? Like, for junipers, we still need to grow and develop the branches. You don't want to just say, we take a long branch like this, right? And really this is too long, I probably will cut this back. Even though it's possible to say, use a branch like this and I could like bend it in itself and create more pad volume. Doing that kind of wiring and structure building is really to the deficit of the tree. It's not really a good way to build, sustainable and clean bonsai. So it's, for Kokaen, right, it's the key thing in their business models is buying the right type of tree. Like my bosses always says like, oh, you need to know like what's a good tree. That's like the most important, and know like why it's good. And know that it's what kind of work you can do on it to improve it and make it better. Yeah, so I'm just clearing out some of the crotch growth and heavier branches I don't need. I think we will reduce this a lot, but I'm just leaving the length, and after I kind of wire and set it in place, if it looks like we don't need it, I'll cut it back much shorter. But just some basic preliminary cleaning. And kind of all the fluff that grows on the bottom, we can pluck it out. If the foliage is, very turgid and say it's like resisting being plucked off, then you should use scissors because you don't want to necessarily damage it too much. But the growth tends to be soft, and I'm just cleaning the bottom side, right? You never want to shear over on the top and just pinch it off. You'll weaken the tree a lot. But in this case, it's just cleaning, and it would be okay. Yeah, it's funny actually. I think the San Diego Bonsai Club was probably the first like bonsai meeting I visited when I was really early interested in bonsai. I just came in. I think I bought a Femina and don't really remember too much of that day, but that was I think in 2014 or 2015. So it's been a long time since I've last been here.
Julian, did you have language issues or did you speak?
Yeah, so that was definitely a challenge, right? So the way I kind of got to the apprenticeship is that I had a friend, Owen Ripe, who was a former apprentice of Kokain. So out in 2017, when I was still in college, I had an internship and job out in Chicago, and he's based out in the Midwest area. So actually, I met up with him and kind of got a little bit involved in the bonsai community over there. And I told him, like I want to come out to Japan, and I kind of asked his opinion and recommendations. And he ultimately referred me to his, later my oyakata. So out in the next year, in springtime, I kind of went, I guess, for like an interview of sorts to go to the nursery. And so I went over there, and it seemed to go well. So, and he took me in, and that's kind of how I started at my nursery. So this branch right here, right? We have this theme that we want to drive everything to the right side. So this branch is too long, especially for the apex, right? We have this first internode here. It's pretty, I would say, unusable, and that's very far removed from the trunk. And it's very coarse as well. There's no ramification. If we wanted to use this, we would have to bend this down and bring it really close to the trunk. But we already kind of have this more upright growing form, especially with this. We're going to build a secondary apex. So if we have all these branches that are kind of growing outward and slightly upwards, and then we have this one branch here on the top that, to make it usable, we have to bend it straight down. It's not going to mesh well with the lower part of the trees. So this will just cut it off and turn it into a gin.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that.
So I'm just gonna finish just cleaning out the crotch growth, and I probably, as I wire the tree, I'm going to further clean it out more. This is just kind of very basic thinning just to make it easier for me to apply the wire.
Julian, do you like to treat the gin with something?
I mean, you can apply lime sulfur, right? If you wanted, if you want to bring out the color. The other reasoning for applying lime sulfur, right? It's like it's a fungicide, so it will prevent, any kind of rotting of sorts. I'd say out here in Southern California, right, we have a very arid climate, so that's really not a major concern in terms of the wood rotting easily and getting damaged. If you say you have deadwood that's touching the soil line on the base, generally field-grown trees, right? The wood is not as dense and resinous because it's just reflected by the density of the growth rings and how the tree is growing, how it has grown in the past. So in that case, right, if you have younger wood, so to speak, that's touching the soil line, it can rot, and you might want to be a little more careful to treat that more often. But I would say otherwise, if you want to see the color, yeah, you can put lime sulfur on it. Otherwise, it's really not necessary to do all the time, except maybe just before you want to show the tree, or just as a maintenance, once a year, to have the tree, a little bit cleaner and prevent any of that kind of algal growth and that green, discoloration. But otherwise, I don't worry too much about it where we live.
So Julian, would this be a good representation of a tree you would have worked on during your apprenticeship?
No. I mean, and I mean, of course, you know, there's a few reasons to that. One is that, you know, for as a business, the kind of trees we want to sell and we're looking to buy are all trees in the 4 to 5 figure range. And then secondly, right, I would say this is more of a project tree in that we can set, you know, a form and have it look relatively nice in the first go, but it takes successive stages of refinement, you know, to really bring out the age in the branches, bring out the structure, and that just takes time, right? So for something like this, when we do this first iteration of work, it's never going to be at that stage in just one go. So that, of course, that's going to limit its value, and of course, it's just you can't cheat that aspect. You know, of course, the material is much more accessible in Japan, you know, when they've been doing bonsai for such a long time. You just have material that's been in cultivation as bonsai for many years. So it's not that the tree is old, it's been developed as a bonsai for a long time. And that's kind of like the real value in some of the material. All right. So I brought some raffia, and we'll just go ahead and apply it on this, and then we'll just start setting the structure and wiring the branches. So generally when you apply raffia, you want to wrap it in the direction you're going to apply the wire, right? So as you turn the wire, it'll cinch the raffia even more, keep it nice and secure. If you bend the branch or wrap the wire in the opposite direction of the raffia, it's going to unravel a bit and not be as strong. In this case, right, in this case, we actually are not twisting the branch, so to speak. So I wouldn't be too worried in terms of the direction you applied the raffia. But say in this case, right, if I wanted to rotate this branch counterclockwise, right, then with that in mind, I would also need to apply the raffia in the same direction. But for this kind of bending, right, all I'm going to do is bring it up, then bend it out. It's really not too much concern. So this raffia actually it's a hula skirt. So it's like a cheap way to get, you know, relatively, it's still kind of short. If I can find a longer one, it would be better. That's just a way to get like cheap raffia. Yeah, so inevitably I'll have to splice multiple pieces together. Really, it would be better to have a longer, continuous piece, but it'll still do the job.
So what you're saying is you wouldn't just start another piece of raffia and just add to it? You really want it all to be one?
Yeah, it would be, you know, cleaner and be nicer if we have just a longer piece. In this case, you know, splicing is still totally doable. It's fine, but it would be preferred to have a longer piece. And then you want to make sure there's a bit of an overlap as you do every bend. You don't want any like big gaps in between kind of the area you're going to apply the load. You know, if you have like this kind of space, you know, there'll be a section basically where all the tension's going to build up and the branch might snap. So make sure the pitch that you wrap the raffia in is pretty evenly dispersed, and just pull it snug and it should do its job. So this is getting kind of short, so I'm going to have to splice another piece. Oh, I forgot. So you were asking me about the language, right? In Japan, I went into like the story of how I got there. I didn't talk about too much on that. So yeah, when I found out I could go to Japan, so the time I could actually start, it was like 6 months. So I had basically 6 months to learn as much Japanese as I could and try to make it work. I would say for a lot of apprentices there, right, you can, get by just by knowing, just some bonsai vocabulary in Japanese and just basic, some day-to-day stuff. You don't really need to be fluent and you can get by, especially at least for kokain at that time. My senpai was there, who is Naoki Maoka-san, if anybody knows him, and he was also fluent in English, which was big help starting out. He could translate and help you out. I would say, of course, the language, right, is to your advantage. So I was still in college at that time, so I did immediately enroll in a course. What kind of happened was that I didn't know any Japanese, so I wanted to sign up for the beginner level course, but it was not available for my last quarter in college. So I pretty much just had to self-study the first entire course and then place into the test the level right above that. So I ended up doing that and kind of really just hunkering down for those 6 months to get somewhat of a working basis of the language. I would say it was definitely not enough, but it still gave me a huge advantage going in versus just not speaking anything. But I would say within the bonsai circles, right, you can function with not a lot of Japanese, but the bigger question is if you want to, not that you have a lot of time to, but if you want to kind of socialize and be a part of, say, the greater Japanese society, just have a normal conversation with people, that becomes very limiting. So if you don't have, the language on your side, it can be very isolating effect, and basically you can't talk to anybody. You're just there to do bonsai. That was definitely a hard part about living there, just not being able to talk to people. So when we get to a branch in the end, we can basically split this strand of raffia and just tie it off, right? So I'm just going to take it, we'll split it in half, and then we'll go around another branch, right? And then we'll just tie it off. It's nice and easy. And then all these kind of spliced tag ends you can just cut out, keep it nice and clean.
How long would you leave the wire on for this kind of branch?
So for a large branch, it really depends how much you're bending it, right? If you say you stress the branch a lot, and naturally in doing a large bend, you're going to introduce a lot of cracks and stress in the branch. The tree is going to respond by forming a lot of callus. So actually it's a bit counterintuitive, but the heavier the bend is, the faster it's going to set. Versus a very light bend, it's not so much stressed. it's going to take longer to kind of callus and set in its place. I would say at least a year, but really you just need to watch the tree, right? If the wire is really beginning to bite into the bark, maybe it's time, you should cut it off. So it's really, I wouldn't say there's like a one-all answer for that. It depends on the tree, the nature of the bend, and how fast it's growing. I would say in this case, probably for a bend like this, it would be at least a year. But yeah. So when we apply wire, right, we need to make sure we have an anchor. So when we bend it, it doesn't kind of pivot around. So we want basically 2 points of leverage. And I'm going to take this branch, right, we have a contact on the trunk, and we'll use this gin here in the back to support it. And generally when you wire, right, you want to have a nice relaxed pitch, like 30 to 40 degrees. It's going to look nice and clean and do its job to support the branch. Sometimes when you do heavier bending, you might go a little bit tighter on the pitch, right? It might not look as nice, but you essentially need the tighter pitch so you support the branch more. You don't want it to basically snap in between the gaps. That also means when you bend it, you have to be conscientious where you apply the load, not leverage the bend where there's a gap in between the wire, but bend it where the wire is bracing the outside of the curve. So that's just something to keep in mind when you bend larger branches, and it'll kind of save you some heartache. So I'm not sure if this size aluminum is actually strong enough on its own to bend this branch. So we'll double up on it, and we'll carry the second piece out to this branch out here.
Julian, what size wire is that you're using?
Actually, I don't really know the aluminum sizes too well. I know like the gauges, but these are usually reported in millimeters, right? This feels like a 6 or 8 millimeter. It feels pretty beefy. Wire is strong enough on its own to pull this up and bend it. If not, we'll have to use a supplementary guy wire as well. So for me, I see this as I don't want to treat it as a branch, but more as an extension of the trunk line. So we want to bring this up where it kind of flows together with this trunk, but we don't want it to be straight, right? Just sticking out. That's why I put the heavier wire on it, so we can put a little bit of a bow as we bring it up. So I think we'll still need to use a guy wire. It's kind of bending, but we use the guy wire to pull it up, and then we can use the sticker wire to introduce the arc. I'll go ahead before I do this bend, because once I put this guy wire, I'll kind of be in the way, and just go ahead and just wire all these branches first. Generally, you want to make sure you take the wires all the way out to the tips so you get a little bit more control to kind of bring the foliage up right. It'll look a lot cleaner. The good thing is that this tree looks fairly healthy, so we have nice, strong, upright terminal growth. A lot of times, though, for different varieties of juniper, or especially if it's weaker, the foliage is going to be floppy. In which case, we really need to make sure we have this nice, clean wiring, and it should go all the way to the basal end. Right, and just care to, not pinch any foliage and carry it, in between. All right, and we have a little loop on the bottom and we can bring it under the cusp of the foliage. So when we prop it up, we can have that lift and control for the placement of that branch.
Julian, do you have any favorite types of tree you really enjoy?
I don't know if I have a strong favorite. I've come to the feeling that it's, bonsai is, enjoyable because you have a lot of diversity in it, experiment with different varieties and species. So I don't know if I have a strong favorite necessarily. I do like oaks a lot as our kind of native broadleaf evergreen. They can be quite nice. But overall, I really do like, all the species I can grow. This is maybe a bit of a zone envy kind of thing, but I do wish we can grow more like, high mountain pines out here in Southern California. Long term, they don't seem to do too well here, just to be on a slow decline. I think having that winter dormant period is pretty important. But aside from that, I really do, to enjoy to grow, whatever I can.
Julian, do you have your own trees that you do and sell?
I sell occasionally, but yes, I do keep my own trees.
You're twisting those branches as you wire them?
Yeah, so sometimes I'll kind of support the wire and set the rough position as I put it on, but I'll probably tweak it and set the actual positioning when I have everything in place.
Julian, another question.
Yeah.
How long would you, after doing this much work, how long would you wait to repop the tree or put it into a bonsai?
So I would say this tree still can be repotted this year. Maybe depends on the condition of the roots inside, right? If the soil is a little bit more compact and you don't have tight feeders close to the trunk, maybe you can't get it in a small pot in one go. So it really depends what kind of roots you see when you pull it out. But I would say this work itself is not going to be too stressful. It's still possible to do a repotting this season. Maybe just not into the right size container necessarily. It'll just depend on what is going on inside this pot. But generally, right, you want to buffer the styling and from the time of repotting as far apart as possible. So, you know, we do the work now, but we don't repot the tree, say, until February. I think it's quite a bit of a buffer, you know, for the health of the tree. I wouldn't be too worried.
Julian, are you still work with anybody here in Southern California or?
Like, you mean to like study under, or?
Yes.
No, not in Southern California. Not, yeah.
In Japan or?
Or you mean like right now?
Yes, so you,
Well, I've been, since I've come back, you know, I mainly just been working and learning on my own. I go up to Sacramento sometimes and try to learn a bit from Peter T., who is another professional who trained in Japan. But yeah, I just try to pick up as much knowledge as I can, just regardless of the source. But I guess I don't have a dedicated teacher necessarily, if that is what you're asking.
But you said the typical internship is 5 years. Do you
Yeah.
Do you have to go back, or is
So that's like a consideration. I feel to have like, well, it's just my opinion, but really because bonsai just encompasses so much knowledge, to really have a, you know, like a higher level, not to say that there aren't people who didn't train in Japan who can be good, but really to just have that, you know, wealth of wisdom and experience, as, you know, it's a multi-generational practiced profession there. I think that would be hard to get elsewhere. So that's actually a consideration for me, especially if I, you know, maybe transition more to doing this full time. I would think going back to Japan would be in my favor. So we almost got all the branches wired. I think I'll wire out just these in the front. Most likely we'll cut this back shorter, but I'll just kind of see where it sets in place. We'll set the lower part of this tree. So when I have like a thicker tagged end here from the last gauge of wire, right? When I go on the next piece, you know, they always say don't cross the wire, but in this case, right, you deliberately would want to cross that tag end of the terminal end. This locks it together, so right, when this branch bends, it's anchored to this thicker piece of wire. You don't get some shifting. So when you go from you know, the last terminal end, you actually do want to hook around the corner. So I would say the rule of like, you can't cross wire. Generally, of course, if you don't need to cross wire, you shouldn't do it because it looks messy. But there are times when you situationally, it's appropriate, right? Because wiring should be function first and then aesthetic second. But of course, it should be functional and look good. But that's just something to keep in mind.
Julian,
Yeah.
how close was your major in school to bonsai?
Oh, it's completely unrelated. I studied material science, and yeah, it has nothing to do with bonsai. All right, so we've got most of the branches wired. There's a few small ones here I'll just set later. So I just kind of want to get the position of this trunk in place. We will need a small guy wire to pull this up, so I'll use this aluminum wire to do that. So normally if I had, say, like a rubber tubing, we can apply it to protect the trunk a bit. We do have a thick piece of raffia, and this wire is kind of on the outer bend. So I'm not too concerned about branch scarring since I am having this wire directly on the trunk. But otherwise it would be better if you have any kind of a protective padding. It's another thing you can do. It'll keep the branch cleaner from any kind of damage and scarring. So I purposely put this guy wire in the center of the trunk, right? If I put it further out here, you'll get more leverage to pull it up. But the thing is, right, I'm not just pulling this up. I want to pull it up and then bend it with that the center of the bend should be in the middle of the trunk so we can arc it, right? And it's not just a straight branch. We can bring it a little higher.
We're all working with you, Julian.
All right, so we kind of brought this up, right, when we treat it as an extension of the trunk, but I don't like seeing this straight section. Actually, you can see the guy wire moved a bit, so I'm going to push this branch in and get this guy wire. It should be in the center. actually, could I get an assistant to move the wire while I hold the trunk?
You want me to break it for you?
Yeah, I'm gonna push this in, and you
Okay.
see, or you got it? Okay, yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah, and I need to move this guy wire. Can it push in a little more?
No, 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 no!
Gotta go. We gotta get it a little further in. All right, I can push it, and then just help me grab this wire here.
Do you want to tie it up this way?
Oh no, I wanted the wire to sit in the middle, not on the top.
Okay.
Yeah, I just need somebody to help move it.
Little more?
Yeah.
Little more?
Yeah, that should be good.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
You didn't break it.
Good job.
Okay, so now we'll take this, right, this extension of the lower trunk. We don't want to see it straight. That's why we applied this thicker, maybe 6 millimeter aluminum wire, and we'll just kind of put a little bit of an arc into it. Okay, so we can kind of see, right, we treat this as another extension of the trunk line, and we pull it up with this guy wire and have it slightly bent in. Right, like what I was mentioning, this branch is going to be, well, there's a few considerations, right? If we want this branch here to be kind of a part of this foliage pad, it's too long. But I think it's interesting actually if we bend this out and we carry it as an extension of the trunk line. So I think that's what we'll do. So I'm glad I actually saved the length. It'll be a little bit more interesting. Kind of bring this up. So we'll have to go back in, apply a little bit more fine wire since this foliage is a little kind of scruffy if we want that cleaner patch shape, so to speak. Right, and we don't need these branches to be longer. We kind of have this as this low directional branch, so these we can just cut back shorter. And I'll probably just set the rough positioning for now, and I'll apply wire on the rest of the tree, and then the very end we'll go in and just tidy up the pads to have it be cleaner.
Got 20 minutes, Julian?
What's that?
About 20 minutes?
Okay.
You mentioned that the heavier bend would set quicker than the smaller, less dramatic bend.
Yeah.
Would that apply to like the thinner wire would stay on longer to hold the shape, or would you take all the wire off kind of at the same time from all that same feature?
Oh, so yeah, you wouldn't, as like a tree on the whole, you wouldn't necessarily take off all the wire, right? Say for these smaller branches, right? If it looks like they are biting in and setting in place, you can take off that wire, but the main kind of structural wire holding the bend, you would leave it on longer. Yeah. This one's a little bit there.
You're on the back of the tree, right?
So from my side, I'm working on the front.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We're at the back.
Yeah. Well, the camera should be on the front of it.
Just getting oriented here.
Julian, do you do individual classes or?
Yeah, so mainly right now I'm doing private works. I do a lot of one-on-ones. I do workshops sometimes, but I usually just host it through a club. Next weekend I'll be in Fresno, just doing a workshop up there. But yeah, I do offer. Well, later I hope to do more kind of group setting classes, but primarily I've been doing one-on-one instruction.
So you got a question, Julian?
Yeah.
What do you do with the part that's been chopped off there to make it look more natural?
With the what?
The part that's been lopped off at the top that's been made it look more natural?
Oh, like this chop here? We can take, our concave cutters and we can kind of peel down the grain a bit. I will clean that up, so we get a, this less, obvious chop here. That's pretty much, yeah, just a little bit of hand carving, and I think it's pretty easy to clean that up.
Which branch do you identify as the apex?
So definitely we'll be using this as the apex. I'll compress this down a bit. The main reason why we want to make sure we keep this branch is this is the sole branch for the live vein on this outside. So if we cut this off, we actually lose this skinny live vein, which I think is a good feature for this tree. Yeah, so I'm just going to finish wiring the whole apex, and then we'll just clean up the branches in just one go, and it should be good to go.
Julian, what was the most memorable tree you worked on during your apprenticeship? Do you have anything most interesting to you?
You know, for me, I was mentioning the reason why I really like the mountain pines is because I can work on a lot of white pines in Japan. So I remember in particular there was one a customer-owned white pine, and it was a Yamadori, and it had really good, right? It's because I think you have a lot of classical bonsai, typical left to right, moyogi shape. But I really do like kind of the more, I guess, raw high elevation pine material, and some of it was, really spectacular. I haven't seen that much kind of material in the U.S. I would just say mainly just in California, stuff like that in our local climate doesn't grow too well. But I remember some of those were spectacular, really nice trees to work on during my apprenticeship. We did have a few, I guess they call them Kicho bonsai, which is these in quote unquote important masterpiece bonsai, which you can get registered by the Bonsai Association in Japan as like a special piece or good example of that kind of tree. And we had a few of those in the nursery. They give them like a recognition and kind of like a tag and label to distinguish them. And there were a few of those that were, quite, I guess as they call it, masterpiece bonsai. And we were able to work and see some of those.
Is there some kind of a governing or association that monitors the nurseries?
Yeah, so they have the Professional Bonsai Association in Japan. It's just called the Nippon Bonsai Association. It's the Japanese Bonsai Association, right? And you can have, they host all the shows. And also, if as a professional you want to participate in auctions to buy materials from, other professionals, you need to be a part of the association. So they do have an actual, I guess, moderating professional organization for bonsai there.
Now, how much the business model for that nursery, you talked about clients.
Yeah.
Do you have clients that you just maintain their trees?
Yeah, so there's those kind of customers, right, where they are like an enthusiasts, you can say, but they employ professionals, right, to maintain and show the trees. So there's that kind of customers, but also there's a lot actually, and for Japan recently, there's a lot of brokers that's mainly coming from China and Europe to import trees into their countries. So actually, I would say it's less so of the quote-unquote patrons that want you to kind of sustain and cultivate bonsai from them, and more of the customer base is being these brokers who come overseas and they're willing to pay a lot of money for these trees, and it's much more profitable for a nursery, right, to take these old cultivated trees and sell it for a very significant margin versus for the customer just kind of maintaining a tree from them. It's a lot less money into it. And that kind of customer is kind of getting less and less, I would say. It's like an aging population in some respects. So there is some kind of a shift in that regard.
What about the pots that you put them in?
Uh-huh.
I know that's can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so you just asking just in general, like pot selection for bonsai, or just kind of what we had in the nursery?
Either one.
Okay. Well, yeah. So at Koken, of course, the pot selection is important, right? It can significantly enhance a tree, right, and increase its perceived value. So, of course, we want the best matching pot in terms of, the size and the style to make it, to show off that tree so we can sell it. So we had a pretty, just underneath all the benches, there's just, hundreds of pots everywhere. And then for kind of nicer pots, we had a display kind of work area inside, and we would keep a large number collection there, especially antique Chinese pots. We had a space for that inside. And those are kind of your more high dollar, sometimes four-figure pots. And so we had those essentially for the appropriate tree, right? We would work with that. Yeah, so I'm just going to go through and just kind of clean up any of this bottom fluff and kind of these branches I previously set. And it'll just look a little bit cleaner. And just kind of get this design set. It does need a little bit more wire, but I'm not sure how much we can run this demo for. But if you really want it tidy, then you want to get our, I guess, our 1 millimeter and all these small branches here. You would want to wire those as well. I think just for the sake of time, we'll just have the structure of the tree laid out, which is more crucial.
Julian?
Yeah.
The mature growth of a prostrata, I have never really seen. The ones that I'm developing
Yeah.
have a tendency to just lay flat, and they don't seem like they could be mounding. Is it possible to mound them?
Yeah, so, you know, prostrata, right, when you get strong terminal upright growth, we can create that kind of pad shape. But prostrata, right, when it gets weak, it very easily tends to flop or revert to juvenile, and it's a little harder to get that kind of pad form. So really it's going to be, you know, relative to the health of the tree. If you keep the tree strong and the terminal tips are healthy, a prostrata can get, you know, at least relative to the like Shinpaku, it's not going to be as tight, but you can still get, you know, that pad shape, so to speak.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, initially, especially when you first style a tree, right? Because naturally all the foliage is on the outside and the tips, but then when you lay out the structure and you create that initial pad shape, right? The interior is going to be empty because all that foliage was on the tips. So eventually, right, if these, you know, kind of interior buds fill in and grows, you'll get that pad volume. So initially it's flat, but it does grow in. What you don't want to do is say this is kind of empty here, and we take like another branch and say lay it on top of it. You know, even though we can get that pad shape, if we lay a branch on top of this, we're going to prevent any more preferential budding, like true internal budding, from growing. So kind of structurally, it's important to lay it out and think about, you know, how is it going to grow versus just like setting the branches to make it look nice right now. So that's a little bit of a consideration. So we'll kind of have this lower branch here as our lower apex. I don't think we need this branch here. We'll definitely cut it back. We do need some tighter growth here that doesn't exist on the tree right now, so really you just have to let that fill in. This kind of, you know, coarser, leggier branch is not so ideal, so maybe if we get some back budding in here, we'll just chop that off. But for now, we'll just kind of make do with what it has.
Would you make any effort to add some curve to that long top branch?
To this one?
Yes.
Yeah, so that one I haven't set in place yet. We're going to put a little bit of movement in it, and that'll kind of be the last piece of this design. But definitely, yeah, we'll put some. So these branches here may be too long to use for this tree. So I'm just going to set it in place and see if it looks okay and if we can use it. If not, we'll probably cut it back. We already have this tiny shoot here. If this grows in more, it can just replace these branches.